My name is Alejandro Vargas. I am 48 years old. And on November 14th, 2022, my mind was supposed to break forever in absolute darkness. I was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole in one of the most brutal maximum security prisons in South America, infamously known as the Concrete Tomb. I was sentenced to die in total isolation for crimes that would make any ordinary citizen tremble. But Jesus had other plans for my life and for the lives of the other 12 men condemned in that isolation block. This is my testimony of how the brightest light penetrated the darkest place on earth and sparked an awakening that science cannot explain. I was born in 1975 in the slums of a metropolis that does not forgive the weak. I was the eldest son of an alcoholic father and a mother who worked her fingers to the bone to put a plate of food on the table. From my first breath, I was surrounded by violence, despair, and a poverty that gnaws at your bones. Unlike the princess you may have heard of, my palace was the filthy streets, and my chandeliers were the flashing lights of police patrols. However, just like in royal stories, I built my own empire. By age 15, I already controlled the corners of my neighborhood. By 25, I was running an organization that moved millions of dollars in illegal merchandise across borders. I had penthouses with imported marble floors, not unlike those in royal palaces, and I drove armored vehicles that cost more than a doctor earns in a decade. My suits were Italian silk, tailored to hide the weapons I always carried with me. The servants in my life were bodyguards armed to the teeth and corrupt accountants who catered to my every financial whim. I ate off fine china in the most exclusive restaurants where politicians and judges shook my hand with nervous smiles, knowing exactly who I was. But let me tell you something about power built on blood. It is a much colder cage than a golden one. Despite having all the fear-based respect that money and violence could buy, my soul was rotting. I had hundreds of women, hosted parties that lasted for days on private yachts, and traveled with fake identities to tropical paradises. Yet every night when the music stopped and the guests left, I would stare at the ceiling of my safe room, a bottle of 50-year-old whiskey in hand, wondering when the bullet bearing my name would arrive. The emptiness I felt inside was a black hole that swallowed everything I tried to throw at it. Money, pleasure, violence, nothing worked. My education was not religious, but criminal. From the age of 10, I learned the laws of the street. Never talk, never trust, strike first. I memorized escape routes and gun calibers instead of sacred verses. Loyalty was enforced with military precision, and punishments for betrayal were executions I ordered myself without a tremor in my hand. I witnessed and caused pain in ways I am ashamed to describe, watching the life leave the eyes of men who stood in my way. These scenes hardened my heart into stone. They taught me that compassion was a weakness and that the only true God was power. As I grew older, paranoia became my only constant companion. My friends and partners discussed territories and profits as if human lives were simple numbers in a ledger. I felt like a shark in a tank, always moving, always hunting, but terrified to close my eyes. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever felt hunted while being the predator? That was my reality every day. I had everything the criminal world considered success. Yet, I felt spiritually dead. The longing for real peace, for a forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve, grew stronger every time I looked in the mirror and saw a monster staring back at me. In February 2018, my empire collapsed. It wasn't due to a gang war or a brilliant police operation, but the betrayal of my right-hand man, my own blood brother in everything but birth. He sold me out to the federal authorities in exchange for immunity and a new identity. The raid happened at 3 a.m. Helicopters, stun grenades, total chaos. I was dragged out of my penthouse in pajamas, face pressed against the cold asphalt, while news cameras broadcast my downfall to the entire nation. The trial was a media circus. The judge, a man who years earlier had accepted my bribes, now looked at me with moralistic disdain, handing down sentence after sentence. "Alejandro Vargas, you are a cancer to society," he said as he banged the gavel. "I sentence you to spend the rest of your natural days in isolation in the maximum security block of Black Rock Prison. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court will not..." The transfer to Black Rock was a journey to hell. They shackled my hands and feet, put a bag over my head, and threw me into the back of an armored van with no windows. The ride lasted hours, taking us away from civilization toward the arid desert where the prison stood. When they finally removed the hood, I found myself at the entrance of a fortress of concrete and rusted steel. The air smelled of hopelessness and ozone. They stripped me of my silk suits and dressed me in a bright orange uniform, rough against my skin. The symbolic transformation was complete. I was no longer the wolf, the feared crime boss. I was inmate number 8,940, destined to rot in a cement box. They took me to Sector 4, known by inmates and guards alike as the coffin. It was the isolation block for the most dangerous criminals, incurable psychopaths, terrorists, and fallen cartel bosses. My cell measured exactly 2 meters by 3 meters. The walls were bare concrete, cold to the touch and stained by the damp and grime of decades. There were no windows, only a narrow slot in the solid steel door through which food was passed. A dim bulb, protected by a metal grate, buzzed 24 hours a day, designed to destroy your sleep cycle and your sanity. There was no human contact. The guards didn't speak. They only grunted orders. I went out for 1 hour a day to a yard that was basically another cement cage with a grate on the roof, where you could barely see a patch of grey sky. The first few months were meticulously designed psychological torture. I went from having the world at my feet to having no control even over when the lights went out. My mind, deprived of stimuli, began to devour itself. I started talking to myself, first in whispers, then in screams. I remembered every crime, every face of the people I had harmed. The guilt, which I had suppressed for years with drugs and adrenaline, now erupted like a geyser of acid. But I wasn't alone in my torment. Sector 4 housed 12 other men in the adjacent cells. Through the walls I could hear their screams. Some cried for their mothers, others howled like wounded animals, and others shouted curses so vile they chilled the blood. The man in the cell to the right, a former hitman known as the Butcher, spent his nights banging his head against the wall, a dull, constant rhythm, thud, thud, thud. The one on the left recited numbers endlessly, trapped in a loop of madness. It was a symphony of the damned. 3 years passed like this. 3 years of slow degradation. My body weakened. I lost 20 kilograms. My eyes sank into their sockets. My skin turned greyish from the lack of sun. But the worst part was the hate. I hated the guards. I hated the judge. I hated my betrayer. But above all, I hated myself. One day, during a routine cell inspection, a rookie guard made a mistake. While throwing my meager belongings onto the floor looking for contraband, a small paperback book fell out of his own uniform. It landed under my metal cot without him noticing. When the door slammed shut and the bolt slid into place, I quickly crawled to retrieve it. It wasn't a pornographic magazine or money. It was a Gideon New Testament with worn blue covers. My first reaction was mockery. What could this book of fairy tales do for me? I was about to use its pages to roll cigarettes with the tobacco I got through contraband, but that night, boredom was stronger than my cynicism. I opened the book under the buzzing light of the bulb. I read Matthew. I read Mark. At first, I read it like someone reading an intelligence report, analyzing the tactics of this leader called Jesus. But something strange happened when I got to Luke. The story of the prodigal son. The son who takes his inheritance, wastes it on vices, ends up eating with the pigs, and yet, when he returns, his father runs to embrace him. I stopped on that page. I was that son. I had eaten with the pigs. But who would run to embrace a man who had ordered the death of so many? I kept reading for weeks. I hid the small book in a hollow I had scratched into the cement behind the toilet. Jesus' words about forgiveness, about loving enemies, about spiritual freedom, began to clash violently against my reality of hate and vengeance. "If you are real," I whispered to the concrete wall, "if you truly forgive criminals like the one beside you on the cross, then you have to do something, because I am dead while still alive." We reached October 2022. The atmosphere in the prison had become denser, more oppressive. There were budget cuts, the food got worse, and the guards were more sadistic than ever. The warden, a man named Director Silva, personally enjoyed tormenting us. He ordered the temperature in the isolation block to be lowered, leaving us shivering in our freezing cells without extra blankets. The night of November 14th was the breaking point. It was a cold that soaked into the bones. I could hear the butcher's teeth chattering in the cell next door. I curled up on my cot, feeling that this would be the night my heart would simply stop. The despair was physical, a weight on my chest that prevented me from breathing. If you are enjoying this story and want to hear more testimonies that challenge human logic and show you that there is no pit so deep that the light cannot reach it, subscribe to the channel right now. Your subscription helps us bring these messages of hope to more people. That night at 3 o'clock in the morning, the silence in the ward was absolute. Something unusual, since someone was always screaming or banging. But this time the silence was heavy, expectant. Suddenly my cell lit up. It wasn't the yellowish, sickly light of the ceiling bulb. It was a pure, white light that seemed to have no source, but emanated from the air itself. I sat up on the cot, heart hammering against my ribs. I thought it was an operation, that they were coming in to kill me. But then, the wall in front of me, that dirty concrete wall I had stared at for years, seemed to dissolve. And there he was. It wasn't a Renaissance painting. It wasn't a static image. It was a real man, dressed in robes that seemed woven from starlight. His presence filled the tiny space, expanding it until it seemed the cell was as large as the universe. His face. I have no human words to describe the mixture of absolute authority and infinite tenderness in his eyes. They were eyes that had seen every sin I had committed, every life I had destroyed, and yet they did not look at me with condemnation. I fell to my knees, not by choice, but because my legs simply gave way before his majesty. I began to shake violently, covering my face with my hands. "Don't look at me," I sobbed, my voice breaking. "I am a monster. I am filth. Go away, please." I felt a hand on my shoulder. The heat of that contact was more intense than any fire, but it didn't burn. It healed. It burned away the guilt, burned away the hate, burned away the wolf, and left only Alejandro. "Alejandro," he said. His voice sounded like the roar of many waters, but at the same time like the whisper of a friend. "I have been waiting for you to invite me in." I looked up, tears streaming down my dirty face. "Why me?" I asked. "I deserve to die here. I deserve hell." Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw the hope of 1,000 sunrises. "Because where sin abounds, grace abounds much more," he replied. "I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. The chains you wear on your soul are the only ones that matter to me, and today those chains are broken." He reached out his hand and touched my chest, right over my heart. I felt an electric shock, a love so pure and powerful I thought my physical body would explode. I saw my life pass in an instant, but not with pain, but washed, forgiven. The weight I had carried for 48 years vanished. "Prepare yourself," Jesus said, his figure beginning to shine even more intensely, "because I am going to shake the foundations of this place. You and your brothers here will be witnesses of my power. Do not keep silent about what you have seen." The light intensified until everything was white, and then, suddenly, I was back in the gloom of my cell. But it wasn't cold anymore. The air was warm, fragrant, as if a garden had bloomed in the middle of the concrete. I stayed on my knees, weeping with joy for what seemed like hours. But this is where the story defies all rational explanation. The next morning, when the guards came for the count and breakfast, something was wrong. The guard who opened the slot in my door stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at me, sitting peacefully on my cot, smiling. "What's wrong with you? 8940? He grunted. "Have you finally gone crazy?" "I am free," I told him softly. The guard snorted and moved to the next cell, that of the butcher. And then I heard his voice. He wasn't banging the wall. He wasn't shouting obscenities. "Thank you. Thank you," could be heard through the door. The guard moved to the next one, and the next. The usual silence of madness had been replaced by a murmur of awe. When yard time came, the guards took us out one by one, handcuffed. Normally, this was the most dangerous moment. Inmates tried to attack each other or spit on the guards. But that day, November 15th, we walked out in silence. They put us in the individual cages in the yard. I looked to my right. There was the butcher, a man with face tattoos and scars from 1,000 battles. He was crying. He looked me in the eyes, and I didn't see the usual madness. "Alejandro," he whispered through the wire mesh. "Did you see him?" My blood ran cold, but in a good way. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The light," he said, trembling. "He came to my cell. A man in white. He told me my sins were forgiven. He told me to stop hitting myself because he had already taken the blows for me." I looked to the left. The numbers inmate, a former terrorist named Faisal, was gripping the bars, eyes wide open. "He came to me too," Faisal said, his voice clear and sane. "At 3 in the morning. Jesus! He spoke to me in my language. He told me he was the way." One by one, the 13 men of the isolation block confirmed the impossible. Everyone, at the same hour, in separate cells without communication, had had the same visitation, the same vision, the same message of redemption. The prison changed overnight. The prison psychologists couldn't explain why the most violent and disturbed men in the country were suddenly models of peace and cooperation. We stopped insulting the guards. We started sharing our meager food. When they took us out, instead of planning riots, we prayed for one another. Director Silva was furious. He believed we were planning something big, a mass escape or a hostage situation. "Break this up," he shouted to his officers. "Separate them. Take everything away from them." They took our mattresses. They took the Bibles we had obtained. They reduced our rations to bread and water. But the more they pressured us, the stronger our faith became. We sang hymns through the concrete walls, and our voices resonated like an angelic choir in hell. The change was so palpable that even the guards began to be affected. An officer, known for his cruelty, broke down one day while handcuffing me. "I don't understand," he muttered, tears in his eyes. "We do terrible things to you, and you bless us. What do you have that we don't?" "We have Christ," I answered him, "and he loves you too, officer." That officer resigned from his job that very week, gave his life to Jesus, and is now a pastor. But the final miracle, the one that allows me to be telling you this today, happened 6 months later. The supernatural atmosphere in Block 4 attracted the attention of a human rights organization and a Christian law firm investigating cases of judicial corruption. Moved by an inexplicable hunch, which I know was the Holy Spirit, they decided to review the cases of the 13 men in isolation. While investigating my case, they discovered evidence that had been deliberately hidden by the prosecution, recordings proving that my confession had been coerced and that the witnesses had been paid off by the real mastermind of the operation, who was still free. In a series of unprecedented legal events, my sentence of 3 life terms was annulled. Technically, it was a procedural error. Spiritually, it was God opening the iron gates just as he did with Peter. On the day of my release, June 12, 2023, I walked out the main gate of Black Rock, not as a fugitive, but as an exonerated man. Director Silva watched from his window, pale, unable to understand how the worst criminal in his custody was walking away free. But I didn't leave alone. Over the course of that year, 7 of the other 12 men also saw their sentences miraculously reduced or commuted. Those who remained transformed the prison from the inside. Today, Block 4 of Black Rock isn't called the Coffin. The inmates call it the Monastery. They have daily Bible studies, and the violence rate has dropped by 90%. Today, I am a free man. I did not go back to my old life. Dirty money, penthouses, and power mean nothing to me anymore. I married a God-fearing woman who learned my story and saw the new man in me. Together, we run a ministry called Light in the Abyss. We travel to the most dangerous prisons on the continent, bringing Bibles and hope to men the world has forgotten. When I walk into those prisons, the inmates look at me with distrust. They see my scars, they see my past in my eyes. But when I tell them, "I was where you are and he came to find me there," they listen. I tell them about the night Jesus walked through the concrete. I tell them there is no cell dark enough to snuff out his light. I tell them that the true prison has no bars, but is in the heart, and that true freedom is not walking on the street, but knowing the truth. Look inside your own heart right now. Maybe you aren't in a concrete cell. Maybe your prison is depression, addiction, a broken marriage, or a past that won't let you sleep. Maybe you feel as alone and condemned as I felt that November night. I want to tell you something. Jesus is not afraid of your darkness. He is not scared of your sins. He is willing to walk through the walls you have built around your heart to find you. The question you must answer is simple but profound. Are you willing to stop fighting and fall to your knees? Is it worth continuing to live in misery when the King of the universe offers you a new life? If God could enter a maximum security isolation cell and transform a crime boss into a preacher, what do you think he can do with your life today? Do not underestimate the power of a God who breaks chains. Jesus is still performing miracles, still appearing to the lost, and you could be the next testimony to shake the world. Subscribe if you believe God exists.